Brendan Barber is a General Secretary of, I believe, the largest voluntary group in this country, the Trade Union Congress, a membership of over 6 million workers in this country. And it gives us great pride, and we wish to show our appreciation of the practical, not just the words, because many people, it's easy to do the platitudes and, you know, we're a great British society, we're all multicultural, we all get on. But real practical steps in ensuring that solidarity with Muslims has been shown at all levels. And this is not just gesture politics. Brendan himself has a long history of being active around different important campaigns. Even as a student, I believe that he was negotiating with the London authorities to make sure that students could have cheap accommodation. And, you know, we think we have it tough with the media at the moment, but I don't think I would have envied his task as a press officer of unions at the time of the Wapping dispute and all the various disputes that were happening in the early 80s at that time. So I think there's a great amount of experience there. And he's also very much involved in the solidarity work about the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, as well as many other international issues. And Dr. Bari alluded to the importance of this alliance, that we don't just become inward-looking, that we're able in this dark and cloudy time to also look at the silver linings, where we reaffirm what we have in common, where we also don't shy away from those difficult battles around social justice, whether it's housing or unemployment or the issue of racism, which many of our politicians don't bother discussing anymore. And instead, we put up these false things where distorted politics is really shaping our ordinary lived experience. So with great pleasure, I invite Brendan Barber to take the stage.
Chair, Secretary General, delegates and observers, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. And it is a great personal pleasure for me to be with you today as you celebrate your 10th anniversary. And indeed, today I'm returning the visit that Dr. Bari made to our Congress in Brighton last September. And as Dr. Bari has just made clear in his report, this has been a busy year for you, and I'm pleased by the way in which the TUC and the MCB have been able to work together much more closely during the course of that year. And just to say that the developing relationship with the National Union of Students is also important to us both. Last September, NUS President Gemma Tumulty addressed our Congress in the same session as Dr. Bari. So today it's a pleasure to be here alongside Amma, and I'm looking forward to hearing her remarks a little later. Now, over the last year, the MCB has never been far from the headlines. And as our joint statement last year recognized, the TUC and the MCB are very different organizations. The MCB is a religious organization. The TUC is a secular one. The MCB was formed in 1997 in Brent, the TUC in 1868 in Manchester. But in a sense, we share common origins. We both arose as a result of grassroots initiatives. The organizations which came together to form our respective council and our Congress were concerned that the people that they represented lacked a voice, that they were misunderstood, and that a few extremists in their midst were coloring the public perception of the work that they were doing. It's perhaps one part of British history that we don't dwell on too much, but at the time that the TUC was formed, in the 19th century, there were a number of violent attacks on workplaces undertaken in a misguided belief that this was a way of advancing workers' interests. So the role of the TUC was seen by our founding fathers to advocate an alternative democratic approach to the cause of working people. So you can see perhaps the parallels. Now, it took many years for the TUC to become a significant force in public life and for our voice to be heard too in Parliament. Your experience over the past decade shows that in today's world, things move much more quickly, a point noted by the Prime Minister himself this last week in his lecture on the media. And this voracious media appetite and their love of eye-catching events causes particular problems for organisations like the MCB and the TUC, whose job is to speak authoritatively and responsibly on behalf of millions of people. In our case, we aim to speak for Britain at work, the 28 million people that are the workforce of our country, and in particular the almost 7 million trade unionists that belong to our affiliated organisations. In your case, it's Britain's 2 million Muslims on whose behalf you speak, and your various affiliates are the means by which you connect with those whom you represent. In both cases, whatever we say, you can be absolutely sure that there will be some among those millions who disagree with our stance. That's the nature of things. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't say anything, and it doesn't mean that we should give way to those who question our validity. Our democratic structures give us our legitimacy. We have our Congress, you have this annual meeting. We have our General Council, you have your committees and structures too. But there is a wider sense in which we need to keep in touch with the opinions of those on whose behalf we speak. Whenever we appear in the press or in the broadcast media, we can ask for nothing more than that the people that we represent say to themselves and their neighbours, yes, that man or woman from the TUC or the MCB said just what I was thinking, or they are really speaking up for me. If only I had the chance, that's what I would have said. And whilst we continue to get that response from politicians, politicians and the media ignore us at their peril. But we are, of course, more than just media spokespeople for our organisations and our communities. We can also represent them effectively by working with other organisations that share our views and indeed represent the same people. Many trade unionists are Muslims. Many Muslims are trade unionists. They look to both the MCB and the TUC to speak on their behalf. And that's why our joint work is so important. The areas in which we've agreed to work together were set out in the joint statement adopted last year. Perhaps the most urgent was to counter the rise of the far right. As our research shows, this is a problem across Europe, with far-right politicians forming part of the ruling coalition in a number of countries. There's even now a neo-fascist grouping in the European Parliament. Here in the UK, the attempt by the BNP to move out of the cities and into the smaller towns and even rural areas has been a worrying trend. Thanks in part to our work and that of other organisations, and credit where it's due to sections of the media too, awareness of what the BNP really stands for is now much, much higher. And as a result, this May's local elections did not see the BNP make the gains that they had hoped for. But we cannot be complacent, and we need to continue to work together to bust the racist myths, to counter Islamophobia, and to address the issues such as lack of affordable housing that lie behind the disillusion with mainstream politics on which parties like the BNP feed. And we need to tackle urgently the poverty and the deprivation that blight too many Muslim communities. So there is still much to do on the political agenda. But it's in the area of workplace rights where perhaps there is greater scope for joint work. As Dr. Bari clearly showed in his presentation at our joint seminar in April, the age profile of Britain's Muslim population is such that there are now many young Muslims entering the labour market. There are many others now at college or university, and that's why the link with the National Union of Students is so important. These young people are the very young people that unions need to reach out to if we are to increase our membership and increase our representative capacity. But more importantly, they're the sort of young people who need to know about their rights at work, who need someone to turn to when they face a problem at work, and who could, with the sort of training that unions provide, act as workplace representatives, and not only be union members themselves, but be part of the next generation of activists taking union values into the workplace. We're looking to a programme of work involving our organising academy, our respective youth structures, and a direct approach to the imams associated with MCB organisations to raise young Muslims' awareness about employment rights and the role of trade unionism in achieving fairness at work and, as a result, greater social cohesion. And just as there is a need to raise awareness of union values among Muslim workers, so there is a need to raise awareness of Islam among trade unionists. When we ask for the modern workplace to be flexible, we're asking employers and union negotiators to recognise workers as people, not just as another factor of production. Workers have family commitments, and they have a right to expect their religious practices to be respected too. And so union negotiators need the information to be able to make the case as to why some workers need to take time for prayers, why it's legitimate to ask an employer to provide a prayer room, and what adjustments in the working day might be necessary to allow Muslim workers to observe Ramadan. The ways in which we carry this joint work forward were discussed at the very successful seminar I mentioned earlier. And now we're looking to build on this over the coming period. And I'm sure that those of you who are able to visit the stand at today's event taken by Unison upstairs will be able to discuss these issues in more detail with representatives of one of our unions. Underlying all of this work, as our statement said, is a belief in a common set of values. The attempt to identify the values that unite organisations as diverse as the TUC and the MCB is something that others are attempting to do in the debate on Britishness. And for that reason, I welcome the Britishness debate. But for my part, I fear that the more that you seek to link values to nationality, the more those values are likely to disappear. As the popular television series Life on Mars has shown clearly, even within a few decades, indeed within the time that I've worked at the TUC, accepted values have changed. And I'm uneasy about identifying one set of values with a country as if to say we share these values, but they differentiate us from those in other countries, whether in Europe, America, Asia, or any other part of the world. My preferred approach is to see what values we share in an age characterized by its diversity. I prefer to look forward rather than back, and to identify values that can apply in any modern diverse society, not just in Britain. And the big question for me, and I think for all of us, is how can we achieve a sense of solidarity in such an age of diversity? What are the values that we need to hold in common in order to allow the space to respect the diversity of religion, culture, and relationships? The basic principle is clear. We should be allowed to do as we wish, so long as it does not prevent others enjoying the same right. And I think some of the remarks which Dr. Bari made at our seminar on some of those difficult issues of gender equality and sexuality that arose at our Congress showed that you're moving in the same direction. In practice, our shared principles mean obeying the law, meeting our obligations to contribute to the common services that the state provides. And for my part, I would emphasize the importance of respect at work, protection for the vulnerable, and the right of workers to combine together in order to bargain on a more equal basis with their employer on terms and conditions at work. I'm sure there's a lot more to be said and a lot of room for debate, and that it is a debate in which we should all be engaged as we seek a better understanding and carry forward the joint work that we've begun over the past year. We've begun, I think, an important dialogue together. So I thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts on how we can work together ever more closely. I wish you well for the rest of your annual meeting. Thank you for listening to me this morning.